Welcome to Little Story Corner, where real-life stories are told. Please sit back and enjoy listening. I opened my front door on a cold October night and found the woman who had stolen 3 years of my granddaughter's life from me, standing on my porch, crying so hard she could barely speak. Her mascara was smeared, her hair was soaked from the rain, her hands trembled as she clutched the railing. "Margaret," she whispered, "please, I need your help." For a moment, I simply stared at her. 3 years earlier, that same woman had looked me in the eye and told me I would never see my granddaughter again. And now she was standing on my doorstep begging. If someone had told me this day would come, I wouldn't have believed them. But to understand why Jessica was standing there that night, you have to go back to the day my family fell apart. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 67 years old, a retired elementary school teacher from Columbus, Ohio. Most people would describe me as quiet, patient. The kind of woman who sends birthday cards on time and remembers everyone's favorite pie at Thanksgiving. For most of my life, family was everything to me, especially after my husband Robert passed away from cancer 12 years ago. Losing him nearly broke me. We had been married for 41 years. 41 years of raising our son Daniel, paying mortgages, attending church picnics, and building a life together. After Robert died, the house felt painfully empty. Then Emma was born. My granddaughter became the light that carried me through my darkest years. I still remember the first time I held her. She wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, and suddenly the world didn't feel so lonely anymore. As Emma grew older, we became inseparable. I picked her up from preschool. I attended school plays. We baked chocolate chip cookies every Saturday afternoon. We planted tomatoes together in my backyard. When she was scared of thunderstorms, she called Grandma. When she got good grades, she called Grandma. When she lost her first tooth, she called Grandma. Those were the happiest years of my retirement. Daniel and his wife Jessica lived only 20 minutes away, so seeing Emma was easy. At least in the beginning. Jessica and I were never particularly close. We weren't enemies either, just different. I believed in simple living. She liked appearances. I drove a 10-year-old Toyota. She leased luxury SUVs. I clipped coupons. She bought designer handbags. Still, I tried my best to get along with her, because loving Emma mattered more than winning arguments. Looking back now, I can see the tension had been building for years. Small comments, tiny criticisms, little signs I chose to ignore. Jessica didn't like how often Emma visited me. She didn't like that Emma listened to my advice. She didn't like hearing people say Emma reminded them of me. At the time, I thought it was harmless jealousy. I never imagined it would destroy our family. Everything changed on Emma's 8th birthday. The party was held in Daniel and Jessica's backyard on a warm June afternoon. There were balloons tied to the fence, children running through sprinklers, neighbors chatting under a canopy tent. For weeks, I'd been saving money for Emma's gift. She had wanted a bicycle for nearly a year. Not an expensive one, just a pink bike with a basket on the front. I spent months putting aside money from my pension. When she unwrapped it, her face lit up. "Grandma, Grandma, it's exactly the one I wanted." She threw her arms around me. I can still remember that hug, the excitement in her voice, the happiness on her face. Then everything changed. Jessica walked over. At first, she forced a smile. Then she asked how much the bike had cost. I laughed and said it wasn't important. Her expression hardened immediately. "You bought this without asking us." The yard suddenly grew quiet. Several guests turned toward us. I felt my stomach tighten. "I just wanted to make Emma happy," I said gently. Jessica crossed her arms. "You always do this." The smile disappeared from her face completely. "You act like you're her parent." The words hit me like a slap. I tried to stay calm. "Jessica, that's not true." "Isn't it?" she snapped. "Every time I turn around, you're making decisions for my daughter." "My daughter, not our daughter. Not your granddaughter. My daughter." I glanced at Daniel, expecting him to step in, to calm things down, to remind his wife that we were family. Instead, he looked at the ground. That hurt almost as much as Jessica's words. The argument lasted only a few minutes, but those few minutes changed everything. Jessica walked away furious. The party continued awkwardly. People pretended nothing had happened, but I knew something was wrong. A week later, Daniel called me. His voice sounded exhausted. "Mom," he said quietly, "Jessica needs some space." "Space? Such a harmless word. Yet it became the beginning of a nightmare. The visits stopped. The phone calls stopped. The invitations stopped. Every attempt I made to reach Emma went unanswered. Then came the final blow. 3 weeks later, Daniel sat across from me in my kitchen. His eyes were red. He could barely meet my gaze. Jessica says, if we're going to make our marriage work, she doesn't want you involved in our lives anymore. I stared at him, waiting for him to tell me he had refused, waiting for him to defend me. Instead, silence filled the room, and in that silence, I got my answer. My son had chosen his wife, and just like that, I lost my granddaughter. At least that's what I believed. What I didn't know then was that life had a way of bringing people back to the very doors they once slammed shut. For the first few weeks after Daniel delivered that heartbreaking message, I kept expecting the situation to correct itself. Families argued. People cooled off. Time healed misunderstandings. At least that was what I told myself. Every morning I glanced at my phone expecting a text from Daniel. Every afternoon I checked my voicemail hoping to hear Emma's cheerful voice. Nothing came. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The silence became its own kind of pain. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was not knowing what Emma had been told. She was only 8 years old. Children don't understand family politics. They only understand who shows up and who disappears. I worried constantly that she thought I had abandoned her. That thought kept me awake many nights. One evening, about 6 months after losing contact, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a blank sheet of paper. Outside, snow was falling softly across the neighborhood. The house felt unbearably quiet. Without really planning to, I picked up a pen and began writing. Dear Emma, today it snowed for the first time this winter. Remember how you used to make tiny snowmen on my back porch? The words flowed naturally. I wrote about my week. I told her about the cardinals visiting my bird feeder. I reminded her how proud I was of her. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it inside a small wooden box. I knew I couldn't send it. But somehow writing it made me feel closer to her. The next month I wrote another, then another, and another. Soon it became a ritual. On the first Sunday of every month, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote to my granddaughter. I wrote about family stories, life lessons, memories of her grandfather, advice she might someday need. I wrote as if she would read every word one day, because hope was all I had left. Birthdays were especially difficult. When Emma turned 9, I bought her a bracelet with a tiny silver heart charm. I wrapped it carefully in pink paper. Then I placed it in my closet beside the other gifts she would never receive. The following Christmas, I bought her a sketchbook because she loved drawing. That stayed in the closet, too. By the end of the second year, an entire shelf was filled with unopened presents. Each one represented a moment I had missed. Meanwhile, life continued around me. I volunteered twice a week at the local library helping children learn to read. I became active in my church outreach program. I attended community events. People often told me how strong I seemed. What they didn't see were the evenings, the quiet hours after sunset, the empty chair across from mine at dinner, the photographs I sometimes stared at for far too long. Occasionally, I would see updates online. Friends would mention Jessica's social media posts, family vacations, birthday parties, school achievements. To the outside world, Daniel and Jessica appeared to have the perfect life. I rarely looked. The few times I did, the pictures felt like tiny cuts. Emma was growing up without me, and there was nothing I could do about it. The second Christmas was the worst. I decorated the house exactly as I always had. The tree, the stockings, the nativity scene Robert and I had displayed every year of our marriage. Everything looked normal. But nothing felt normal. On Christmas Eve, I prepared dinner for myself. Out of habit, I set 3 places at the table. One for me, one for Robert, though he had been gone for years, and one for Emma. Halfway through the meal, I realized what I had done. I stared at that empty chair for a long time. Then I quietly cried, not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because somewhere out there my granddaughter was growing up, and I was missing it. Still, every month I kept writing, because deep in my heart I refused to believe our story was over. By the beginning of the 3rd year, I had settled into a routine that looked peaceful from the outside. Most mornings I woke up before sunrise. I made coffee, watered my plants, and read for an hour before heading to the office. Most people were surprised to learn I still worked. The truth was, retirement never suited me. Teaching had always been more than a job. Helping young people succeed gave my life purpose. After Robert died, I had used our savings and a small insurance payout to start an educational consulting business. At first, it was just me helping struggling students prepare for college entrance exams. Over time, it grew. One student became 10. 10 became 50. Then schools began calling. Parents referred friends. Eventually, I hired staff and opened small learning centers across central Ohio. Nothing happened overnight. It took 20 years of hard work, long hours, and careful planning. By the time I was 67, the company was thriving. Yet very few people knew much about it, including Jessica. That had never bothered me. I wasn't interested in impressing anyone. The greatest satisfaction came from seeing students succeed. Still, I sometimes wondered if Jessica had ever truly known me. She seemed to believe I was simply an elderly woman living off a modest pension. Maybe that assumption made it easier for her to dismiss me. Meanwhile, I occasionally heard bits and pieces about her life through mutual acquaintances. Jessica had become heavily involved in an online fashion business. At first, everyone said it was doing well. She posted glamorous photographs online, expensive dinners, weekend getaways, designer clothing, perfect family portraits, the kind of images people carefully select to convince the world everything is wonderful. But I had lived long enough to know appearances could be deceiving. The happiest people rarely spent much time proving their happiness. One afternoon, I ran into an old neighbor who still lived near Daniel and Jessica. We chatted for a few minutes in the grocery store parking lot. Before leaving, she hesitated. "Margaret, I probably shouldn't say this." I immediately felt a knot form in my stomach. "What is it?" She lowered her voice. "I think Daniel and Jessica may be having financial problems." I didn't respond right away. Part of me didn't want to know. Another part couldn't help caring. She explained that delivery trucks had been arriving constantly. Construction projects had started and stopped. There had been rumors about loans and business investments. Then she shrugged. "Maybe it's nothing." But I knew life well enough to recognize warning signs. That evening, I sat alone on my back porch watching the sunset. For the first time in years, I found myself thinking about Daniel more than Emma. When he was a little boy, he hated disappointing people. He would cry if he thought he had hurt someone's feelings. He wasn't naturally selfish. He wasn't cruel. Somewhere along the way, he had simply become afraid of conflict. That fear had cost us all dearly. A few weeks later, I received another unexpected glimpse into their lives. My friend Carol worked at a local bank branch. We were having lunch when she casually mentioned seeing Daniel recently. She stopped herself immediately. "I probably shouldn't discuss clients." I nodded. "Then don't." But the concern on her face told me enough. Something was wrong. Very wrong. That night, I opened the wooden box containing my letters to Emma. There were dozens now, nearly 3 years' worth. I carefully flipped through them. Birthday letters, Christmas letters, letters written on ordinary Tuesdays when I simply missed her. As I held them, I realized something. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want Daniel or Jessica to suffer. I wanted accountability. I wanted honesty. But I didn't want destruction. Age has a way of teaching you that revenge rarely heals a wounded heart. You think it will. You imagine satisfaction. But most of the time, pain simply creates more pain. What I wanted was something far simpler. I wanted my family back. Unfortunately, life was moving in a direction none of us could yet see. Behind the carefully filtered photos and smiling social media posts, cracks were spreading through Daniel and Jessica's world, and soon those cracks would become impossible to hide. The collapse didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about most disasters. People imagine a single dramatic moment when everything falls apart. In reality, it usually happens slowly, quietly. One bad decision layered on top of another until the weight becomes too much to carry. I didn't know all the details at the time, but later, Daniel told me how it unfolded. The first signs appeared in Jessica's business. For nearly 2 years, her online boutique had looked successful from the outside. She sold fashionable clothing and accessories through social media platforms and her website. At first, orders came steadily. Friends praised her. Local magazines even featured her business in small articles. Jessica loved the attention. She loved being seen as an entrepreneur. Unfortunately, success made her overconfident. Instead of growing slowly, she borrowed money to expand. She rented warehouse space, purchased larger inventories, paid marketing agencies thousands of dollars every month. The problem was that sales never grew as quickly as expenses. When the economy tightened, customers became more careful about spending. Orders slowed. Then they slowed even more. Jessica convinced herself it was temporary. Every struggling business owner wants to believe next month will be better. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. In her case, it wasn't. By the time she realized the seriousness of the situation, she had already accumulated substantial debt. Credit cards, business loans, lines of credit, money borrowed from every available source. And then life delivered another blow. Daniel lost his job. The company where he had worked for nearly 15 years announced major layoffs. His department was eliminated. Just like that, his steady paycheck disappeared. For a family already carrying significant debt, the timing couldn't have been worse. At first, Daniel remained optimistic. He updated his resume, applied for positions, attended interviews. Weeks passed, then months. The job market wasn't easy for someone in his field. Rejections began arriving one after another. Every rejection chipped away at his confidence. Meanwhile, bills continued arriving with perfect consistency. Mortgage payments, insurance premiums, utility bills, credit card statements. The numbers kept growing. The income didn't. According to Daniel, their house gradually transformed from a home into a battlefield. Arguments became part of daily life. Small disagreements exploded into major fights. Jessica blamed the economy. Daniel blamed her spending. Jessica blamed Daniel's unemployment. Daniel blamed her business decisions. Neither wanted to admit how serious the situation had become. The person who suffered most was Emma. Children notice far more than adults realize. They hear raised voices through bedroom walls. They see worried expressions. They recognize tension at the dinner table. By then, Emma was 11 years old enough to understand that something was wrong. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, she quietly retreated to her room. There, hidden inside a drawer, she kept a small collection of photographs. Pictures of us baking cookies, planting flowers, holding hands at the zoo. Photographs Jessica had forgotten to throw away. Emma looked through them often. I didn't know it then, but later she told me. She said looking at those pictures made her feel safe. As the financial pressure intensified, Jessica became increasingly desperate. Collection agencies started calling. At first, she ignored them. Then they started calling multiple times a day. Letters arrived demanding payment. Past due notices appeared in the mailbox. The stress consumed her. One night, according to Daniel, Emma entered the kitchen while they were discussing another overdue bill. The conversation stopped immediately. She stood there quietly for a moment. Then she asked a simple question. Does Grandma still love me? Neither parent answered. Jessica looked away. Daniel stared at the table. The silence said everything. Emma walked back to her room. For Jessica, that moment became impossible to forget. Years of anger suddenly collided with the reality of what had been taken from her daughter. Not money, not opportunities, family. Yet pride is a stubborn thing. Even then, Jessica refused to reach out. She convinced herself they could still fix everything. But reality had other plans. A few weeks later, the letter arrived. Certified mail. Official. Impossible to ignore. The mortgage company had begun foreclosure proceedings. After years of trying to maintain appearances, the truth was finally standing on their front doorstep. The family home was in danger, and for the first time, Jessica realized she was losing everything she had fought so hard to protect. Meanwhile, I remained completely unaware of just how close they were to disaster. I was sitting in my living room one quiet evening writing another letter to Emma. I had no idea that only a few miles away, my son and his family were watching their lives unravel. Nor did I know that before long, a knock on my front door would change all of our lives forever. It was raining the night Jessica came to my house. Not a violent storm, just a steady autumn rain that coated the streets of Columbus in a thin layer of silver and made the world feel quieter than usual. I had spent the evening exactly as I spent most evenings. A cup of chamomile tea sat beside me. A mystery novel rested open in my lap. Soft jazz played from a speaker in the corner of the living room. At my age, I had learned to appreciate peaceful routines, especially after so much heartache. Around 9 o'clock, I heard a knock at the front door. At first, I assumed it was a delivery driver at the wrong address. I wasn't expecting visitors. Certainly not at that hour. The knock came again. 3 slow taps. Something about it felt different. Urgent. I set my book aside and walked to the door. When I opened it, I froze. Jessica stood on my porch. For a second, I wasn't sure I was seeing clearly. The confident, perfectly dressed woman I remembered was gone. Her hair was soaked. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. Her shoulders slumped as if she had been carrying a tremendous weight for a very long time. The sight shocked me, not because I hated her. Oddly enough, I didn't. But because she looked broken, completely broken. Jessica. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, tears began rolling down her cheeks. I stood there silently. Neither of us moved. 3 years of pain seemed to hang between us. Finally, she whispered my name. Margaret. Her voice cracked. Then she started crying harder. Not the kind of tears people cry when they're embarrassed. The kind that come from deep exhaustion. The kind that appear when a person has finally run out of strength. Instinct took over. Not anger, not resentment. Instinct. I stepped aside. You'd better come inside. She entered slowly. Water dripped from her coat onto the hardwood floor. I grabbed a towel and handed it to her. Neither of us mentioned the awkwardness. There was too much history in the room already. I led her into the kitchen, the same kitchen where Daniel had once sat and told me I was no longer welcome in their lives. The memory flashed through my mind for only a moment. Then I pushed it away. I filled a kettle and turned on the stove. Some habits never leave you. When life becomes difficult, make tea. Sit down. Talk. One step at a time. Jessica sat at the table while I prepared 2 cups. She looked around the room. Nothing had changed much. The same curtains. The same family photographs. The same grandfather clock ticking quietly in the hallway. When I placed a mug in front of her, she wrapped both hands around it, as if she were trying to hold herself together. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. We're losing the house. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was surprised. Because I wanted her to continue. The words seemed to pour out once she started. The failed business. The mounting debt. The foreclosure process. Daniel's unemployment. The collection calls. The sleepless nights. Everything. For nearly an hour, she talked. I listened. There were moments when she cried. Moments when she couldn't finish a sentence. Moments when she stared at the table because she couldn't bear to look at me. Yet through it all, I noticed something. She wasn't making excuses. For the first time since I had known her, she wasn't blaming anyone else. Not the economy. Not Daniel. Not bad luck. Herself. She blamed herself. Then she said something I never expected to hear. Emma asks about you. My heart stopped. I hadn't heard my granddaughter's name spoken in this kitchen for 3 years. Jessica wiped her eyes. She asks if you still love her. I looked down at my hands. Suddenly, all the letters hidden inside the wooden box upstairs flashed through my mind. Every birthday, every Christmas, every missed moment. I swallowed hard. What do you tell her? Jessica began crying again. I don't know what to tell her anymore. The honesty in that answer hurt more than any insult she had ever thrown at me, because it revealed the damage. Not just to me, not just to Jessica, to Emma, an 11-year-old girl caught in the middle of adult mistakes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. Finally, Jessica looked directly at me. For the first time all evening. I was wrong. The words came quietly. I was jealous of how much she loved you. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Jessica continued. I convinced myself you were trying to replace me. I didn't interrupt. I spent years protecting my pride. Another tear slid down her face. And now I've hurt everyone. At that moment, I realized something important. The woman sitting across from me wasn't my enemy anymore. Life had already punished her far more effectively than I ever could. Then she whispered the words that would change everything. I don't know where else to go. And for the first time in 3 years, I found myself wondering whether our family still had a chance to heal. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For a few moments, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if the previous evening had really happened. Had Jessica truly sat in my kitchen? Had she actually apologized? Had she really admitted she was wrong? 3 years of silence don't disappear overnight. Part of me still struggled to believe it. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the first light creep across the neighborhood. Then I thought about Emma, as I had every day for the last 3 years. Only this time something felt different. For the first time in a very long while, hope had returned. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Jessica. Her voice sounded calmer than it had the night before. Emma gets out of school at 3:30. I immediately knew what she was asking. My heart started pounding. After all this time, I was finally going to see my granddaughter. I spent the rest of the afternoon unable to focus on anything. I changed clothes 3 times, then laughed at myself for acting like a nervous teenager. At 3 o'clock, I got into my car and drove toward the middle school. The entire drive felt surreal. 3 years, 3 birthdays, 3 Christmases, 3 years of wondering if I would ever see her again. And now I was minutes away. I arrived early and parked across from the school entrance. Children began pouring out of the building in groups. Parents waited near the curb. School buses lined the street. Every few seconds, I found myself checking the entrance. Then I saw her. At first, I almost didn't recognize her. The little girl I remembered was gone. In her place stood a young lady, taller, older, more mature, yet somehow still unmistakably Emma. For a moment, I simply stared. 3 years of missed memories hit me all at once. Then she looked up. Our eyes met. Everything stopped. She froze. I froze. Neither of us moved. The world seemed to disappear. The buses, the traffic, the voices, all gone. There was only Emma and me. Then I saw recognition spread across her face. Grandma. The word reached me even from across the parking lot. The next thing I knew, she was running. Not walking. Not hesitating, running. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders as she raced toward me. I barely had time to open my arms. She crashed into me with all the force an 11-year-old could manage. I held her tightly, tighter than I probably should have. Neither of us wanted to let go. I felt her shaking. Then I realized she was crying. So was I. I missed you, she whispered. 3 simple words. 3 years of pain. 3 years of separation. 3 years of unanswered questions, all contained in those 3 words. I missed you too, sweetheart. I don't know how long we stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. It didn't matter. Nothing else mattered. Eventually, Jessica walked over. She stayed several feet away, giving us space, giving us a moment that should never have been taken from us. That evening, all 3 of us returned to my house. Emma couldn't stop talking. She told me about school, her favorite teachers, her friends, her soccer team. I listened to every word, trying to absorb 3 years of life in a single afternoon. At one point, she looked around my living room. It feels exactly the same. I smiled. Some things don't change. Then I stood up. There's something I want to show you. I walked upstairs and returned carrying the wooden box. The same box that had sat in my closet for years. The same box that held every letter I had written. Emma looked curious. What is it? I placed it on the coffee table and opened the lid. Inside were stacks of envelopes, neatly organized, carefully preserved. Hundreds of pages. Her eyes widened. What's all this? I swallowed hard. Letters. She looked confused. For who? For you. The room became silent. I picked up the first envelope. The first one was written 6 months after I stopped seeing you. Then another. And this one was your 9th birthday. Another. And this one was Christmas. Emma slowly reached into the box. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up one of the envelopes. She opened it carefully. Then she began reading. A few minutes later, tears filled her eyes. Then another letter. And another. And another. For the next 2 hours, she barely stopped. She laughed at some memories, cried at others. Every letter answered a question she had carried for years. The biggest question of all, did Grandma still love me? The answer sat inside that wooden box, over 100 times. By the time Emma finally looked up, tears streamed down her face. Without saying a word, she walked across the room and wrapped her arms around me again. And behind her, I saw Jessica quietly crying too, because at that moment, all of us understood the same painful truth. Love had never disappeared. Only time had. The months that followed were not easy. Movies often make reconciliation look simple. One heartfelt conversation, one apology, one emotional reunion. Then everything magically returns to normal. Real life doesn't work that way. Trust takes years to build, and sometimes only seconds to break. Our family was learning that lesson firsthand. Still, something important had changed. For the first time in 3 years, we were moving in the same direction, together. Emma began visiting my house every weekend. At first, neither of us wanted to waste a single moment. We baked cookies, worked in the garden, played card games at the kitchen table. Sometimes we simply sat and talked. One Saturday afternoon, while helping me plant flowers, she looked up and asked a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, were you ever angry at me?" I nearly dropped the gardening trowel. Never. Not even once. I shook my head. "Sweetheart, none of this was your fault." She looked relieved. Then she quietly nodded and returned to planting. Children often carry burdens that belong to adults. I was grateful she no longer had to carry that one. Meanwhile, Daniel slowly became part of my life again. The first few conversations were awkward. Years of guilt hung between us. One evening, he stopped by after work. We sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Mom." Simple words, but they carried 3 years of regret. "I should have stood up for you." I looked at my son, really looked at him. He seemed older than I remembered, more tired. Life had humbled him. "I know," I said softly. His eyes filled with tears. Mine did too. There wasn't much more to say. Sometimes forgiveness begins in silence. Jessica's journey was harder. She carried the weight of knowing many of these wounds had started with her decisions. To her credit, she never ran from that responsibility. She attended financial counseling, sold inventory from her failed business, took a regular office job while rebuilding her life. Most importantly, she stopped pretending. The perfect image she had spent years protecting was gone, and strangely enough, she seemed happier without it. One afternoon, she asked if we could have lunch together, just the two of us. I agreed. We met at a small diner downtown, the kind of place where coffee cups never stay empty. Halfway through the meal, she put down her fork. "I spent years seeing you as competition." I listened quietly. She continued. "I thought Emma loved you more than me." I could hear the shame in her voice. "You know what I finally realized?" I waited. "Love isn't a pie." I smiled. She laughed through tears. "There isn't a limited number of slices." "No," I said gently, "there isn't." For the first time in years, we both laughed together, not because the past no longer hurt, but because healing had finally begun. Financially, things improved too. I refused to simply write a check and erase their problems. That wouldn't help anyone. Instead, I helped Daniel connect with several professional contacts through my company. Within months, he secured a stable management position. Jessica worked hard to pay off debt and rebuild trust. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't quick, but it was honest. And honest work creates stronger foundations than shortcuts ever do. The true victory wasn't saving a house. It wasn't restoring finances. It wasn't proving anyone wrong. The real victory happened on Emma's 12th birthday. The entire family gathered at my house. The dining room was filled with laughter, the smell of homemade food, the sound of conversations overlapping, the kind of evening I had dreamed about during those lonely years. At one point, Jessica stood and tapped her glass. The room fell quiet. She looked around at all of us. Then her eyes settled on me. "I need to say something." Her voice trembled. A few years earlier, she would never have allowed herself to appear vulnerable. Now she stood openly before everyone. "I made mistakes that hurt this family." The room remained silent. I allowed pride and insecurity to control my decisions. Tears formed in her eyes. I took precious time away from people who loved each other. Emma reached for her mother's hand. Jessica squeezed it. Then she looked directly at me. "Margaret, I'm sorry." I stood and walked around the table. Without saying a word, I hugged her. The room filled with tears, mine included, because forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it prevents pain from becoming the final chapter. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone on my porch. The same porch where I had spent countless nights wondering if my family would ever heal. The stars shone brightly overhead. The neighborhood was quiet. And for the first time in years, my heart felt at peace. I thought about everything we had lost. 3 birthdays, 3 Christmases, 3 years. None of that time would ever return. But we still had today. We still had tomorrow. And sometimes that's enough. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about someone you love. A phone call, a conversation, or even a simple apology can change more than you realize. Life is shorter than we think, and pride is rarely worth the price we pay for it. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of the importance of family forgiveness and second chances, please consider sharing it with someone who may need to hear it today. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and join us again. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it and subscribe for more emotional, true-to-life narratives. Thank you for listening.